Hi everyone, I'm Phil Morgan, I'm Lead for Recovery and Social Inclusion. I work for Dorset Healthcare.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Rose and I'm the Director of Operations for the Dorset Mental Health Forum, and also I co-lead the Wellbeing Recovery Partnership with Phil.
And the Wellbeing Recovery Partnership is the partnership that Dorset Healthcare has with Dorset Mental Health Forum. And we're here today to talk about the Recovery Education Centre and thinking 10 years on, how did we get here, what have we done, what have we learned from that process. And it's funny being back in this room, isn't it, Sarah? Because when we were thinking about what the Recovery Education Centre might be, we were sat in this room. It didn't look like this with a fancy tree, but we had some really interesting and really powerful and I think probably pivotal discussions at that point.
Yeah, I mean, the opportunity to have the space to explore what might be possible, that was the first time really we'd had a kind of blank sheet to say, actually, what would make a difference from a lived experience perspective? Let's hear what people's perspectives are, and from kind of clinical services, let's get in a room, let's kind of make some decisions, let's start thinking about what could be possible, and that was really exciting.
And I think it was the first time really, although we'd been working together for a while, that we started trying to co-produce things in a more equal way in terms of sharing power. And I think lots of really interesting dynamics came up about, do NHS staff have any feelings and who has kind of the right to understand people's experiences and communicate them, and what does knowledge mean?
Yeah, I mean, the power thing is really, really important because it was always not the elephant in the room, but always sort of towards the side of conversations, and actually to be able to dig into that, to hear what it feels like when you feel totally powerless, but also as staff to hear what it feels like when you have no opportunity or control or hope actually for people. So we really got into some important questions that actually have really helped to underpin the direction of the REC moving forward.
And I think what I also remember from those days is how useful it was that you kind of come from an educational background. So you could bring so many perspectives about adult education. And I think, working as a clinician, and I'm an occupational therapist by background, even if you're trying to work in an empowering way, there's a very different dynamic to supporting someone than to work in a kind of recovery education way where you're sharing knowledge and it's a much more democratic approach to learning.
Yeah, and I think that was really important, that we could just kind of ask questions about, well, why don't we do this? What would happen in the community? So much before we were thinking about, what structures do we need in place for people who experience mental health issues? What do we do around risk? And risk was kind of the foremost driver, whereas actually we could have conversations about, so what in our communities do we want to access? How do we make that work for people? And how do we help people to build a bit of literacy around enabling them to have a voice? We in latter years, we talk a lot about voice, we talk about amplification of voice, but in those early stages, it was really, actually, how do you have the language to be able to ask for what you need, or the ability to have expectations, really? So being in this space and being kind of just human beings, whether you were wearing a clinician's hat or whether you were wearing kind of educational hat or a lived experience hat, we were just a load of people that really believed in this possibility around change.
And I think a lot of what you're saying kind of, I guess, reminded me of why we wanted to set up a Recovery Education Centre. So I think we had a lot of ideas about the importance of education, of people being empowered, of people having knowledge, of democratising information around mental health so people could make choices and decisions. And we've been starting thinking about what that might look like. We had some peer workers delivering on some training courses for staff. We had some peer-led courses that were already running. And then we went to some of the Refocus on Recovery conferences, the international ones, and there was people talking about the Recovery Education Centre in the States and that they'd started to develop this. And then, if I remember correctly, there was IMROC, which is the Implementing Recovery for Organisational Change programme and they started promoting the idea of recovery colleges, and we started thinking, well, what would we want one to look like in Dorset?
Yeah, and the relationships were built. So one of the first times that we started talking about the rec, we were all on a conference in London, and we were kind of, again, coming together to share ideas, to think about what's possible. And it was quite new then, actually, that there were these opportunities for people with lived experience to come to these kind of big conferences alongside clinical services. So we were really able to kind of think about what did we want to do in Dorset, and as we always do, how are we going to make it a little bit different here? So not necessarily copy or replicate models that were national, but actually bring it back home and really think about the assets that we've got and what could be possible. And that was really exciting, and really drove the kind of the mad few weeks and months that we had as we tried to kind of make a vision a reality. It was crazy.
Because basically once we kind of got the go ahead, we were just given a ridiculous deadline. So I think from January we were told to get it up and running by April, and then we launched our sort of pilot term. So we started our official term in September, but that pilot term we first ran, I think we ran 6 courses, 12 times. We had 80 people registered. We literally had no idea whether it was going to work, whether anyone would want to do it, what the impact would be. And I think it's safe to say that we were blown away. And then from September, almost till lockdown, we just grew.
Yeah.
I think we're up to 6,000 registered students, but just the demand and what people wanted and people's experiences and their feedback was just it was unimaginable, I think, in terms of those early days.
And although it was really busy and we had very, very tight deadlines, we knew instinctively that we needed a little bit of creative space. So in those couple of weeks at the beginning, we really thought about train the trainer. And bearing in mind we had a room full of people with a range of skill sets, we thought about, okay, so what have we got here that we can put into a train the trainer option that's going to give us enough that we feel just about confident enough to move this forward. And you're right, it's grown exponentially, but because we did that, we've been able to weave people's experiences and people's feedback in as it's grown. So as the relationships have grown, the people have changed, we've been able to kind of flex and move with that. But ultimately, I think any of us that were involved in the beginning feel really kind of intrinsically connected with the recovery education. It really is something that kind of we put a lot of ourselves into in those early stages.
And it was funny, that first train the trainer, because thinking about co-production, actually you delivered it on your own.
Yeah,
and it was like we didn't even have the sort of way to think about, actually, is that really co-production? And then I think that has really been our sort of touchstone of when things work well and when things don't, is that within the Recovery Education Centre, within the courses, if we're creating spaces that are balanced and safe and shared, and that there's that shared understanding and that approach, that's when things go really well.
Yeah.
But when that balance tips and that isn't right, or that we're leaning too much towards sort of education, or we're leaning too much towards perhaps peer support, or that we're not sort of taking that view, that's when things seem to not work so well.
Yeah, and the discipline that we had to have really around listening to dissent. So now, 10 years later, we talk about the importance of people being heard in their dissent before they can move forward. And actually, we learnt that through those very early stages of the rec, when people came along to courses and just didn't enjoy it, didn't get much from it, came and said, what are you trying to do? This is rubbish. And actually, rather than saying, oh, well, a bit of negative feedback, we wanted to understand more. We wanted to engage with people and say, we didn't get it right this time, we're really sorry, but tell us what we can do differently. What would have made a difference to you? Tell us your experiences, because we're representative, but we haven't got everybody's voice. So I think that commitment to kind of just not being afraid to kind of look at what we're doing and think, well, maybe we did get it wrong, I think is really important.
And I think I was really struck by a time when it was really like sort of, I guess, this clash around what is recovery anyway? And people, saying, I don't need to rub your recovery in my face, or what does recovery mean? It doesn't have any relevance to me. And I think that was so helpful in terms of us, I guess, questioning the concept of recovery and how it's been applied. because I think, if you look at some of the really early writing around recovery with Mary O'Hagan, for instance, and, talking about how it has to be understood in its social context, it has to be understood as a struggle rather than this idealised, hopeful sort of thing. So it was really important for us, for one, to create space for people to be able to self-identify what recovery meant to them and to reject the word recovery.
Yeah.
And that really helped us in terms of this democratising knowledge. It's not about trying to persuade anyone of anything, it's about trying to create a reflective space where people come together, but also that importance of social context. And I think for us going forward, in terms of what we're looking for the record, certainly from my point of view, is that sort of social context and social justice, and how do we knit together the needs of people within their communities? How do we link the educational component with the practical help that people need? How do we use our learning, and then how to involve people and their voices in the shaping of how mental health services can offer more choice, more control, be more responsive and be more compassionate?
Completely. And, ultimately social justice, enabling people to expect more from life. It wasn't that long ago when people who experience complex mental health issues would just be told not to expect more, don't have a relationship, don't really think about too much about your housing situation. If you're lucky, you might get some volunteering. And actually, through the work that we've done, we've seen the enormous possibilities and capabilities. And we really feel that it's important that through education, through understanding more about my own experiences, reframing my own experiences, and identifying my strengths, I am capable of doing way more than perhaps society or myself or my family or my network thought. And that is what will help us ultimately to develop and change culture of mental health services in Dorset. And we get a lot of reflection from other people that come down in to see what we're doing, really around that kind of your commitment, our commitment to thinking about giving people a voice to expect more is really important.
Yeah, and I think, again, in terms of Hope for the Future, I think it's trying to build that, create a consistency, so that experience of having a voice, being heard, being understood, having access to knowledge and power is more equally accessible. Because some people have said that the rec has changed their life, or some people have even said it saved their life. But that experience hasn't been universal, and it hasn't been for everyone, and it needs to be part of a bigger picture. And I think that's what we're really hoping to do going forward for the next 10 years.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we want to do is ensure that our communities have a much broader stake in the Recovery Education Centre. So we will continue to be committed to driving it forward, but actually for communities to feel they own that themselves, and that actually things that matter to them, things that are important to them, are reflected in the course offers, the access, and as you're saying, kind of the quality. It's essential that people in Dorset have access to recovery education wherever they are, on their terms, in a way that matters to them.
And that's why this 10-year programme is really important to us, because this isn't just about us sort of sharing what we've done, but we want to hear from you in terms of what you've learned and be able to build on that and move things forward for the future. So thanks very much for listening. Goodbye.
Thank you.